Hey, what's up everybody? Commander Radix here, bringing you another video, and today I would like to welcome you to a very special first episode to a very special series. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud to present to you, and very scared to present to you, the beginning of a new sort of special mini-series that I want to do on this channel called The Symbolism of Transformers. We are going to be transforming how you see Transformers. So, as I am bringing, or sort of ending the hiatus on Transformers content on this channel, because it's been a long while since we started doing, since the last time we did Transformers content, I was thinking about what should I talk about? What should I talk about in regards to Transformers? You know, what would be a good subject for Transformers lore? What would be a good subject for Transformers talk? And I thought, let's get down to the basics. What is a Transformer? And, that led me places. You know, not just what are Transformers materially, right? Cybertronian robots with sparks that fight each other, right? But what do they represent? And that got me, you know, places, right? Things from, what does it mean to change? What is change? Is change good? Is change bad? What does science fiction really represent in the mythos of humankind? And what is its relationship like with fantasy? Where did fantasy come from? What is the symbolism of the relationship between the Cybertronians and the humans, and how the Cybertronians interact with the environment? That they come down from space, they come down from the literal heavens. What's going on with this Optimus Prime guy? Why is he always trying to sacrifice himself to save the world? Why does he keep dying? Why does he keep coming back? These are all these ideas that just flew into my mind, ultimately resulting in me deciding to create this mini-series. This 7-episode mini-series called The Symbolism of Transformers. Why 7 episodes? Because 7 is a symbolic number. It means fullness. And if you guys like this series, then maybe we'll do a second season one day. But I want to do a sort of test drive with 7 episodes. I'm kind of being a little bit ambitious because my goal is to finish all these episodes and then release them weekly, in addition to my already weekly upload schedule, which means we'd have 2 videos a week. So we'll see how that goes. My idea is I'm not even going to release the series until I've finished creating all the episodes. And you guys might know that I've had my upload sort of schedule broken down into different seasons of the year, and I'm hoping that this Symbolism of Transformers series will be a special series taking place during the winter of 2023 to 2024 season of Commander Radix, which means I am recording this on January 5th, and I need to have the whole series finished by like January 15th. So, it's possible none of you are seeing this, but if you are seeing this, that means that it's going to be coming out every week for the next 7 weeks. Now, I should say for this sort of season 1, as it were, we're going to be focusing basically as much as possible on this general idea of a G1 Transformers, of a Generation 1 Transformers. We're going to be talking about Transformers in that context of Generation 1 Transformers. Why? Because this subject is already way too niche. Talking about the sort of metaphysical symbology of Transformers, right? Very niche. Let's keep it general. Let's keep it open to G1. Let's not bother talking about the exceptions that show up in other Transformers series. G1 also sort of lays down the major archetypes of the series and of the Transformers characters, and later incarnations are building up from G1 in a way. So we can think of G1 as sort of an orthodox Transformers in a way. But I think I might make some references to other Transformers franchises like Beast Wars, the Aligned Continuity, and the Unicron Trilogy. But that covers the Transformers part of the Symbolism of Transformers title. But Radix, what do you mean when you say symbolism? Oh boy. We live in a world that is intensely symbolic. Some of you may know, and I feel like I'm bringing it up every video I make recently, but some of you may know that I am an Orthodox Christian. The Orthodox Christian worldview is an intensely Christian symbolic worldview. You know, in other Christian denominations, you have things like, oh, is the Bible literal or is it just symbolic? Or, oh, is the Eucharist the literal body of Christ or is it symbolic? But, like, sort of from the Orthodox point of view, reality is symbolic. There's not really a dichotomy between those two things. So this series, is heavily inspired by mainly two things. Mainly by The Language of Creation, Cosmic Symbolism in Genesis, a commentary by Matthieu Pageau, and the Symbolic World series on YouTube by Jonathan Pageau, by the Pageau brothers. They are sort of going through what Orthodox Christian symbology is, what the symbolic worldview is, and I highly recommend that you check those guys out so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. If you don't have a good grounding in those two sources, probably 99% of what I'm going to say in this Symbolism of Transformers series is just going to go over your head, I think. But from the Christian perspective, we live in a world that has been dreamed up by the greatest of authors, that being God. And even if you aren't Christian, and I want to make clear that from the start that this isn't a proselytizing video, this isn't an evangelization series, this isn't an apologetics series either. So I'm not trying to convince you of my worldview, but I'm simply going to talk about the symbolism of Transformers through that lens, right? And I don't think you really have to be Christian or Orthodox Christian even to I think, appreciate some of the things I'm going to talk about in this series, so I hope we don't get the wrong idea. But it seems to me that even if you aren't Christian, there does seem to be evidence that we live in some sort of ordered universe. There is some sort of order to the universe. This is what the ancients, like the classical era people, called God or Logos, and I won't blame you if you want to call it Logos, if you want to sort of separate from the sort of, Christian conception of God. Okay, for the purposes of this video series, fine. And this universe we live in is also comprehensible. We use our mind to decode symbols. But again, this isn't an apologetics video, and we're just using this idea that we live in an ordered, comprehensible universe as a presupposition. And symbolism of any kind will have to presuppose some sort of intelligence is existing. So what is a symbol through this worldview? So in the Christian perspective, remember that God spoke the world into existence, right? The very first thing he does is God said, "Let there be light," things like that, right? He's using the divine logos, and this is something even the ancients would call the logos, the word, right? He used the logos to create the world. What does this mean? This means that the universe is a language. It has a grammar. It has a syntax, vocabulary, inflections, and so on. And this language is the building block of the universe. And it's through this where we get symbols. Symbols are the meeting of the divine with the creation itself coming together. It's when you have a heavenly principle meeting an earthly basis. When they meet, when they touch, it creates a symbol. Just as humanity is meant to be the sort of connection between heaven and earth, taking the heavenly creation, creative spirit, as it were, and applying it to the earth, having dominion over it, right? Another way you could think of it as you have an abstract principle, and then you have concrete principles, and when those meet, that is a symbol. In Orthodox Christianity, there's this idea that God is sort of beyond our understanding. We can't really understand what God is, and in this way, he is sort of almost an abstract principle. Saint Dionysius the Areopagite goes into detail about how, really, we don't know anything about God. We cannot possibly know anything about God besides what has been revealed to us by God in things like his divine energies and things like the scriptures. And even then, especially with the sort of humanizing vocabulary used in the scriptures, it's really there to help us understand, help us get some sort of understanding. But even then, it doesn't fully describe him. It'd be more accurate to describe what God isn't than what God is, because he is beyond the category of is. But in Christian theology, he came to earth and became man. He had a body, right? The earthly principle in the form of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ himself was a sort of symbol, right? An icon, you could say, of God, and he was God. We're getting really deep for a Symbolism of Transformers series. But that's sort of the idea, and if you want to sort of de-Christianize it for your own understanding, that's fine. There's going to be some sort of equivalent of this way of thinking in a lot of the ancient traditions, so, you know, do with that as you will. This isn't an explicitly... This series, the Symbolism of Transformers, I don't want it to be explicitly religious, but it is fundamentally religious in the same sense that J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings isn't explicitly a Christian work, but it is fundamentally a Christian work. But that goes into symbols. Now, Radix, you might be asking, how does this relate to Transformers? How are we talking about the symbolism that constructs the world? And how is that related to the Hasbro Transformers toy franchise? Well, we have a few things to say about that. One, man is created in God's image. What does that mean? That means a few things. We're going to focus on the aspect that God is a creator and mankind as his image is sort of born to create as well, to participate in that creative spirit. However, because man is not God himself, man can only create with what God has already created and given to him. Humanity is incapable of creating any sort of pattern or structure that isn't already a symbol created by God. Have you ever heard the idea that there isn't really anything that's original? Like, I know, especially if you're getting into YouTube and you're starting to become a YouTuber, you might realize, oh, I want to make this sort of video, but somebody else has already made that video, or something like that, right? And after a while, you start to realize that there's no such thing as an original video idea. Something that isn't inspired by something else in any way, shape, or form. That just doesn't exist. This goes back to J.R.R. Tolkien and his idea of subcreation, that man as God's image, as creators, are going to create, we are going to create using with what God has given, and that symbolism, in the words of Jonathan Pageau, is inevitable. The very, almost biblical, symbolic, cosmological, universal structures that exist in the universe are going to appear in our creation, in things like fictional writing. Whether we are intending it to or not, whether we're aware that we're doing it or not. And this kind of ties back to the idea from Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Everything has been created, and we are sub-creators. Now you might be saying, Commander Radix, you're reading a lot of Christianity stuff into Transformers, but that clearly wasn't the intended case, to which I have to bring up Saint Basil the Great. Here I am talking about Saint Basil the Great in a Transformers video. Saint Basil the Great wrote a sort of essay, letter thing about how Christians should read pagan Greek texts, that is, ancient Greek mythological texts. Now, compare that to something like fundamental Christianity today, where it's like you want to stay away from anything unpure. Oh, it's unpure, we can't have that. You shouldn't be reading this Buddhist sutra or the Quran because it's another religion and it's evil and we need to stay away from it. Right? That's not really the worldview that a lot of the ancient Christians had. Take, again, St. Basil the Great, frankly, he said that Christians should read Greek texts, like Greek mythological pagan texts, before they even read the Bible. St. Basil says that we should be like bees, going to the flower, taking what we need, and leaving behind what we don't. Now, this can apply in two different ways. For one, it can apply for reading, texts from other religions, taking what's good from those religions. Ancient Christianity does believe that there is good in other religions. Taking what's good, leaving behind what doesn't jive, and just going on your way. St. Justin Martyr says that everything that is good belongs to Christianity on the principle that God is pure good. Likewise, then the second thing, and this is what we're really looking at for the purposes of this series, is that even fiction is going to teach us something about creation because of the symbolic principles I've mentioned before. So we can go to fiction and we can see God, we can see symbolic structures, we can see the logos, the order of the universe in fiction. Again, whether or not it was intended by the writers or not. And that's what we're going to do for this series. We are going to be Saint Basil's bees with Transformers. Now, a caveat I want to mention here, and this is something brought up by Saint Gregory of Nyssa in his Life of Moses text, where he brings up that symbolism is their patterns, but we have to sort of separate the idea between symbolism and allegory. An allegory, ideally, is going to be consistent throughout the story of symbolizing a specific pattern or structure or archetype. Saint Gregory of Nyssa says symbolism doesn't really work that way. A character in a work can represent different symbols at different points in time. It's not going to carry out the same idea throughout the text. For example, he uses the idea of Aaron in the book of Exodus as at first a symbol of a guardian angel. But then he mentions, yes, Aaron's going to go on and build the golden calf and things like that, and obviously a guardian angel wouldn't do that, but that's not how symbolism works. We can't read into the text like that. So we might use representations of characters like, spoiler alert, we're going to look at Optimus Prime as a type of Christ archetype later on in the series. That doesn't mean that every single thing every Optimus Prime has done has been something Jesus Christ would do. But rather, we're going to say that at points in the story of Optimus Prime, he is participating in the archetype of Christ. Okay, so we have covered the basic framework, the basic philosophy of what this series is talking about. Let's start to look into the actual symbolism of the Transformers. So most of this video is going to be about setting up that framework, right? But for the rest of the video, I want to talk about one sort of small but important theme, just so this video isn't just framework. And so for this first episode, I want to talk about the core of Transformers. What is literally in the name? That is Transformers. That is change. Change in Transformers. How is change symbolized in Transformers? And I think Transformers does a very good job at showing that there are at least two sides to change. Right, these are Transformers, they transform, right, they go from robot mode to vehicle mode, right, that's the most obvious meaning, but going deeper into the symbolism of change, and that, change is sometimes good and it's sometimes bad, right, sometimes it's the Autobots and sometimes it's the Decepticons. Transformers does very well at showing the duality of change. So first, let's ask the question, how can change be good? And I have two notes that I want to get into here. One is self-improvement. If you take yourself from being bad to good or from meh to better, right, that is self-improvement. That is a good thing. And it is a type of change. One way the Autobots demonstrate this is whenever they learn a lesson at the end of an episode, right, or whenever they learn a skill. How many times in G1, in the comics or in the cartoons, does Bumblebee have to learn a new lesson, right? I think Bumblebee especially embodies this, going from a bot that has a lot of room to grow, especially in things like skill, and, how many times does Bumblebee get an origin story about how he became a scout, right? And of course, it's not only Bumblebee that goes through this, but this is a basic storytelling technique of showing a character growing, character development. The Transformers also shows a way change can be good in technological development. Now keep that in mind because we're going to talk about technological development a little bit when we go to the Decepticons, but the Autobots show good technological development, how technological development can be good. Whenever the Autobots share technology with the humans, it's usually for a good purpose, oftentimes with good outcomes, whether that be the humans are able to use Autobot technology to fight the Decepticons better. They were vulnerable before the Autobots showed up, when the Decepticons were wiping the floor with the humans, but when they work with the Autobots, they can change, they can develop, and they themselves can sort of become more like the Autobots, more like the Transformers, by equipping themselves with Transformers technology. And it reminds me a lot of the concept in Orthodox Christianity of theosis, which is the idea that if humans act more like God and try to align themselves more with a lifestyle similar to that of God, then they themselves can sort of become closer to God and become a god in their own right. Just as humans often spending time with the Autobots, living like the Autobots, incorporating the abilities and powers of the Autobots are becoming more like the Autobots. We can see that especially in the Japanese G1 series, when I think Daniel basically becomes an Autobot. And I don't mean, like, obviously there is a sort of demented version of this in things like Autobot X, but Daniel, later on known as Dan, ends up having his body inside, or his soul, his personality inside of an Eldoroid, or an Eldadroid, sorry, where he's basically walking around in a black-colored body of Optimus Prime. He's become indistinguishable from a Transformer. And there is the idea that technology, when we change to get more developed technology, that there needs to be a training time with it, or else we'd end up using it for bad. For example, Autobot Spike, right? But on the flip side, let's look at the exosuit. The exosuit was a piece of technology. I am resisting the Pageauian urge to bring up garments of skin. But Daniel puts on this exosuit, and once he learns how to use it, he can transform, he can run around, he can save his father, right? You know, there's a big depth of meaning there behind the exosuit. But let's look on the other side. How can change be bad? And boy, do the Decepticons give us a lot of examples of that. For one, change can bring to power a dictator, right? Let's think of political change, right? Especially in a democratic institution where rulers change, it can be very easy to install a dictator. It doesn't necessarily just have to be democracy, but monarchs. If a monarch dies, you can get a dictatorial, evil monarch later on in the line, right? And we see that with the constant struggle and change of power between Megatron and Starscream, going from bad to worse, depending on which one you want to look at as being worse. We can also see change being a force of destruction. For example, in the G1 comics, Megatron turns Cybertron into a cosmic dreadnought. He sticks thrusters on the thing and pilots it throughout the universe, crashing into planets, right? Very bad guy. That technological change, changing the planet from one state to another, not good. The Decepticons often use change for destruction, and that can be seen in their vehicle modes, or their alternate modes. Megatron turns into a literal gun. The Decepticons in and of themselves, when it comes to technology and change, are kind of representing that biblical idea that technology is something that we aren't ready for when we first get it, and we have to sort of go through trial and error before we get it right. Right? The idea in the book of Genesis isn't that the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was something that God was never going to give Adam and Eve. He made it, but then he was never going to give it to them. No. He was going to give it to them once they were ready. But the pattern we see play out in the Bible and play out in our lives is that technology at its first advent is usually not good for us. We have to learn to harness it, hence Daniel learning how to use the exosuit. It's also interesting to note how change in the sense of reversion, right, almost like a nostalgic change, a change of going back, is often seen as a bad thing in Transformers. Think about reviving, the concept of revival, reverting back or bringing back. Usually it's something like reviving Cybertron from its dead state, or it's reviving Megatron, right? I know this isn't G1, but I think of Transformers Energon, where reviving is kind of a very bad thing, because at the first half of the series it's about reviving Megatron from the dead, or it's about reviving Unicron from the dead. I think about Transformers Prime, how and even Transformers, the 2007 movie, where Megatron wants to revive Cybertron, but really turn it into his own slave, right? In his own image, he wants to build it. Think about in the Generation 1 cartoon, where even reviving Optimus Prime requires the use of a quintesson. And while yes, there are good intentions there to revive Optimus Prime, it's the fact that they couldn't revive him just through normal means. They needed a Decepticon to do that. A quintesson to do that. That's interesting. And it brings to mind to me Ecclesiastes chapter 7, around verse 10. Say not thou, what is the cause of the former days were better than these, for thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. In Christianity, there's the idea that nostalgia can be a bad thing, that it can induce sloth, that it can induce despair, that, oh, things were better in the past, things aren't going to get better in the future, you know, that doomer mindset. But Christianity wants to say that the good days will come, right? There will be a general resurrection of the dead, according to Christianity. But you have to let things take its course. Yes, everything old will become new, but that cannot be dictated by us mortals. And though I think it definitely wasn't intended, I think that idea is played very straightforwardly in Transformers, especially with things like the resurrection of Cybertron. Even something like the resurrection of Cybertron in Beast Machines, where it becomes techno-organic, even though it's not in the Beast Machines cartoon itself, later supplementary material like Transformers Universe featuring the Wreckers kind of reveals that that whole plot was a Quintesson ploy to weaken Cybertron to attack it. Now, there is a type of neutral change in Transformers, a type of change that can be used for good or bad, and that is the creation of life, interestingly enough. Many times in Transformers, you take an inanimate object and it then, like, use magic, use the Matrix, use the Allspark, use whatever, and infuse life into the object and create a living Transformer. That happens quite often. Think about the Combaticons, for example, or the Dinobots. The life itself, you know, isn't exactly inherently a good or bad thing. It depends on what that life is used for. If it's Combaticons for destruction or Dinobots for, well, they're destructive at first, but then later on they're good guys, right? We could, maybe for a better example, we could look at the aerial bots, for example. But overall, Transformers does a good job at showing us how change can be good or it can be bad, and that these forces are constantly clashing with each other. That's the key to understanding Transformers, that change can be good or change can be bad, and these two forces are fighting, and it's really up to the humans to pick a side, right? The humans need to figure out how they want to use that change. Do they deny change altogether? There are no good aliens or bad aliens, Jaeger, it's just us versus them type idea? Do we deny it whatsoever? Or do we say that there are some aliens that are good, there is some change that is good that we need to work with in order to fight bad change? And you have these two cosmic forces from space, right? A war in heaven, if you will, that's for another day. But because humans are caught in the middle between this war, between these two forces, good and evil, they need to make a choice, much like how we make choices every day on this earth, whether or not we want to follow that angel on our shoulder or the devil on our other shoulder. Join me next week when we talk about the angelic and the demonic symbology of Transformers, and we even talk a little bit about giants. That's going to wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Follow me on social media for updates, and I will see you again next time, ladies and gentlemen.
Slick and wet and super soft all